inside your mouth?
Esophagus?
Not quite yet. What do you go for the esophagus? Oropharynx, right? And then you go to the what? Laryngopharynx, and then you go to the esophagus, and then you go where? Stomach, and then after the stomach you go into the duodenum, then you go into the jejunum, then you go into the ileum. From the ileum, you then go into the large intestine, which we'll talk more about next week. But the first part of the large intestine is called the cecum. Then you go into the ascending colon. Then you make a turn at something called the hepatic flexure, and then you go into the transverse colon. You make a turn at a place called the splenic flexure. And then you go into the descending colon. Then you go into the sigmoid colon. Then you go into the rectum, and then you go to the anus, and then you go to the toilet. No, I don't know. We're hopefully a fun place to go. All right. Identify the organs that are retroperitoneal. I'm not going to go through that all again, but it's listed here in your lab guide. Again, if you're clueless and you didn't memorize it, think anatomically. Stuff that's pushed towards the back of your abdominal cavity, things that are at the back, tend to be retroperitoneal. Where things that are kind of free and moving around inside the cavity, those tend to be intraperitoneal. Okay? All right, so let me go through all these models and pictures. There's a lot here. Let's see. Part of it is how it's arranged too on this lab guide. I probably should just list it in a paragraph, but anyway. All right, so once again, our favorite sagittal head model, which we use all the time. It's all the way back up. Interesting. Okay, so hopefully this isn't a shock, but here's the mouth or the oral cavity. It's not shown really well, but right here and right there will be the labial frenulum, right? When you pull down your lower lip, you know that little piece of skin that holds the lip basically like to just underneath your tooth? That's the frenulum. Anyone ever noticed that before? Anyway, go look in the mirror later. You'll see what I'm talking about, unless you're a freak and you don't have one. But anyway, that's what's going to be there. Oral cavity I mentioned. The fauci is kind of this imaginary, or faust, however you want to pronounce it, is kind of this imaginary line that runs between the epiglottis and the uvula. It just marks the boundary between the oral cavity, which is over here, and then the oropharynx, which is back there. Hard and soft palate, well, where the bone is the hard palate, and then as you get back here, where there's just muscle and fat, that's the soft palate. Again, this part of the soft palate is the uvula, which is right there. Okay. Party foul. I didn't know. Me. Let's see. Hold on. Where's that head that I wanted? Dang it. Well, nope, that doesn't show it. Anyway, I'll just. As for the salivary glands, there's another model that shows it better, but this little head that I have here, basically the only one that's really showing on this model is your parotid salivary gland, which is right there. But if we were to cut this skin away here and cut the bone away, there's right underneath your tongue is the sublingual salivary gland, and then right underneath your mandible is the submandibular salivary gland. So make sure you at least glance at a picture where that is. All right, back to this guy. Here, of course, is your tongue. Okay. Underneath, just like you had labial frenulums that are located there and there, underneath your tongue, you have a lingual frenulum, and that's the one where you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, and you see that little thing holding it down to the floor of your oral cavity. That's the lingual frenulum. What are these white things?
Teeth.
Teeth. All right. If you want to be a snob, you can call them dentes. Right. Again, know your boundaries of the pharynx. So here would be the nasopharynx. Here is the oropharynx. And then from the tip of the epiglottis to where the esophagus bit begins, that would be the laryngopharynx. All right. Here's, of course, the esophagus. Now, it's not really shown well on here, but the upper esophageal sphincter, I was kind of trying to explain it, and I don't think we have a model that shows it particularly well, so I'd have to use some other picture. This portion here is part of the cricoid cartilage that makes up the larynx, and there is a muscle that attaches to the cricoid, spins around the back of the esophagus, and then comes back and reattaches to the cricoid. Can you kind of picture that in your mind? That's called the cricopharyngeus muscle. That is your upper esophageal sphincter. When it contracts, it essentially closes off the opening into the esophagus. Okay. All right. Lower esophageal sphincter, I've got to show you on a different model, so let me move along here. And I'm going to go on to my stomach model. Stomach model. Get it together. All right, so here's my stomach model. Now, up here is where the lower esophageal sphincter would be. Okay? Essentially, in the walls up here is a little muscle, and that forms the lower esophageal sphincter. So the lower esophageal sphincter is like a part of the wall itself, whereas the upper esophageal sphincter is like a muscle that's actually extrinsic to the esophagus. Okay. All right. Other parts then, let me put this back on. This area up here is the fundus. The middle part, this area right around here where the lower esophageal sphincter is located, that's the cardia. This bulging part that goes up here is the fundus. Most of what you're seeing here then is called the body, except when you get down into this area, and that's the pyloric area. And in the walls of the pyloric area, you have another muscle called the pyloric sphincter that controls food going into the duodenum. Other things to notice on the stomach. The underside of the stomach, in other words, this edge here, is called the greater curvature. And this little, anyone know what this little yellow rim is right there? They've cut it, but does anyone know what that is? What's the fatty apron that hangs? This is the greater omentum. Remember that thing that I told you, like when you cut into someone, you're going to see fat first? That the greater omentum hangs off of the greater curvature of the stomach. Okay? This edge up here is the lesser curvature of the stomach. The liver would be someplace up here, and then running between the lesser curvature of the liver is where you would have the lesser omentum, and that was the one on those 2 surgeries that I showed you that they kept having to cut through fat just to get to the exciting stuff. Okay. Okay, moving right along. If you open up on the inside, what are these things? Radiae, right? Those are radiae. You hear it now. You hear Bob Marley rolling over to this grave. No, that's the rugae. Okay. All right. All right. Favorite model of the pancreas, because I think it's our only model of the pancreas. What's this over here? Spleen, right? Hopefully you won't forget that. Anyway, here's your pancreas. This thing that kind of looks like the letter C, which does not stand for Cubs, all right? It stands for Cleveland, all right? Anyway, this letter C is the duodenum, all right? That's the duodenum. Sitting kind of in the middle of that C is the head of the pancreas. So this is the head of the pancreas here. The other part going out is the body, and then when you get out at the very end, that would be the tail. You know, could I point to one spot kind of here and say, what is that? No, I'll try to make it unambiguous. Like if I want to ask about the tail, I'll try to point out here. If I want to ask about the body, I'll point like someplace in there. Okay. This is the main pancreatic duct. It's running through there. This is the accessory pancreatic duct. It also opens into the duodenum. Here is where you have the duodenal papilla that represents the opening of the, well, there's, what you don't really see here is the ampulla of Vater. The ampulla of Vater is the collecting area for fluid coming from the main pancreatic duct, but then also for fluid coming from, wait for it, I gotta turn it over. Here's the common bile duct coming down the backside. So the common bile duct hooks up with the main pancreatic duct at this thing here that you really can't see called the ampulla of Vater, and then they both empty out into the duodenum right at that spot, and that's where you have the sphincter of Oddi